invite you all to take a seat, and we're going to have a little talk, fully improvised, with Claire. First of all, how are you, Claire? And thanks for being here with us.
Yeah, doing well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So what happened since last time we spoke? No, I'm just kidding, but can you present Pathway, the startup you co-founded?
Yeah, so Pathway is a deep tech. What we do is that we put on the market a developer framework to help developers build real-time data pipelines and intelligent applications, making sure that your AI and ML models are working on data that is always fresh, for instance.
Okay, like the topic today was a lot about cybersecurity, and we talked a lot about data. I think that's like what you're tackling. Who are your clients? What are like the use cases that you're tackling for them?
Yeah, so we always have technical users and business users. On the business front, without disclosing too much of what BNP is doing, we're seeing use cases, pure streaming use cases. So BNP Paribas being a bank, you have tons of transactions being processed. You want to make sure that you run your algorithms as quickly as you can. For instance, if you have a fraud, you want to make sure you detect it. So you have those cases in Gen AI as well. I mean, BNP Paribas announced that they were to release, I think, 1,000 AI applications within the organization. And we see a lot of those around LLMs and RAG, so retrieval augmented generation. And today a big topic is how do you make sure that those applications are running on data that's fresh? So basically, if you ask a question, what's the value of this stock market, this index, you want the value now or a minute ago. You don't want the data from yesterday or from a week ago. So you want to make sure the indexing makes sense of your data.
Do you like, so you need to make sure that the input is accurate, like the data points. How do you do that? Like, do you analyze the accuracy of the data before, connecting them and analyzing it?
So it's done at various levels.
Vulgarize for me. No. I'm a 5-year-old child.
It's done at various levels. So like in many organizations for BNP Paribas, they have a number of data sources that we call live data sources, meaning every milliseconds, every second, you have new data points that arrive. And then the challenge is knowing the extent to which you can trust this data point. In the banking industry, usually you can trust them. It's not the case, for instance, in logistics, where you use IoT and sometimes the devices are a bit shaky. Usually you see a transactions, you know it happened, but you still have check mechanisms giving interval of confidence to your data to say, all right, this data, I'm pretty sure there's been like no one.
So it's like a manual audit, you would say?
It's not manual. It's
okay.
Yeah, it's fully automatic in the pipeline.
It's like millions of data points. You mentioned, well, we talked about BNP Paribas, of course, but I know that you have several other clients. Can you talk about them? I'm not going to tease you. I'll let you see what you can mention today.
Yeah, so we have a few that are here around. So La Poste is right there, is a big user. Some public use cases around making sure that supply chains are being adapted to the climate constraints. It's also being rolled out for the Olympics. So getting live information on the traffic to make sure you get delivered this summer during the Olympics and Paralympics games.
I'll be there. So
yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Transdev is here as well, so one of the largest mobility operator, making sure that passenger information is always up to date, so that when you're waiting for a bus, you have exactly the right information and not some theoretical information. We're also working with the defense industry, where you have streams of data, IoT, maritime data, working with CMA CGM, which is here as well. So various industries. Today, about 75% of the Fortune 500 companies have real-time data sources and are trying to leverage it. So
how many of them do you count them in your portfolio as clients?
Just the beginning, but yeah, expensing in the US is something that has been happening over the past few months.
So I would say that life is good at Pathway at the moment.
Life is good.
Pretty confident? All right, I'm going to go on a more personal note. I can tell that you're a female, but I can also tell that you co-founded this company. So I think you're 4 co-founders, right? 2 guys, 2 girls?
Yeah.
Explain to me, and more importantly, are you an ovni within this industry as girls, basically?
Yeah, it's true that when you are at the crossroad of entrepreneurship in general, plus in very data-oriented AI topics, you tend to see less and less women in the field. But Susanna, the CEO, is brilliant. Like she did a PhD in machine learning and so on.
She taught you?
Yeah, she was my professor actually when I was at university. So that's one of the fun stories of how we got to meet.
Did you, like, if you can see yourself with Susanna being a teacher, can you feel some kind of stuff that would tell you, oh, maybe we can create together a company one day? What I'm asking you is that for all the people that are looking at us and listening to us, is like, if you're a student, you might create a company with your teacher. How to be open-minded on that?
It's not something I was anticipating necessarily. It's something you see a lot at the PhD level. So usually it's very often you'll have someone doing a PhD and they will have a PhD advisor. And we see a lot of deep tech companies being created like that. I have a few examples in mind, but you have like fantastic professors who've done research for decades. They finally have something that they say, all right, we've reached this R&D level where there's something we can put on the market, or there's something we can try to commercialize. And they have some PhD students who are like super familiar with a topic, who've worked on it, but who then realize maybe they don't want to work for decades as academia, and you have super cool ventures being built like this. So Susanna, I don't know, I think at the time she knew it was something possible.
She reached the limit, in her PhD.
She did great, but she found stuff that she was like, it would be a bit silly not to make sure it gets to the market. And actually CMA CGM, they were one of the first industry players to say, well, this shouldn't stay as a paper, this should be implemented because you can have a tremendous impact just rolling it out.
How big is the gap between theory and practice? So like Susanna had like a clear idea of how to, develop your product, but was it as you thought it would be?
It certainly evolved, I think, between when we created the company 4 years ago and now. However, it always depends what you're doing in your PhD. For her, she was working on real life data sets that were public about like world shipments and so on. So it wasn't something purely theoretical out of the blue.
Okay.
So there was this idea in mind that it's good to do research and being able to, some people do theoretical research and some do more applied research. And the idea was, how do we have an impact with what we built in a lab?
And you were convinced?
Yeah, I was like, let's give it a try, and here we are.
And that's like literally my question. So we don't talk about age. As Kylian Mbappé said, do not talk to me about age. But I do have a question. I believe that I personally have little experience still in the professional world. Why did you decide, to create a company instead of, I don't know, working for big corporations that are already established, learn from, more experienced professionals?
Yeah, I think people go different ways about kind of building their career towards entrepreneurship. For me, I was still a master's student, so I felt like I didn't have much to lose. I was like, let's give it a try. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, we'll figure it out later.
But that's funny, because like your peers as students, didn't they think that if they didn't sign a CDI, like a long-term contract, they would not make the best out of their master degree, which is a big risk also?
Yeah, many of my peers went to like BCG, Google, either big consulting, big tech. Some of them actually went through those companies and then 2-3 years later built their own venture. So
no regrets.
Different strategies. I think everyone needs to find what suits them at the moment. So.
What's your role actually at Pathway? Yeah, how do you split that with Susanna and also your two other co-founders?
It's something that has evolved a lot over the past 4 years. So what you do when you're like 4 people in the company is very different than when you're 20 plus, and it will keep on evolving.
How many are you at the moment?
22 at the moment, yeah. And so I started it on paper. I'm COO, so in charge of operations. What it means is that for a very long time, I had only technical founders and like mostly technical founders. So I was more business oriented, trying to figure out, my co-founders are really good at this as well, but for us, it's such a horizontal technology that we say, to which market do we want to go? Should we go to banking? Should we go to telcos? Should we go to logistics, so having to kind of make those hypotheses at the beginning. Today I still do sales for the company, so going to companies and explaining them how it works, explaining the value proposition.
Winning public tenders.
Yeah, drafting public tenders.
I don't know if we can spoil. No.
No, I mean, public tenders, I mean, La Poste is known to have long public tenders, and we got it and won, and that's really nice to have a multi-year contract, especially at such a young age of the company when we got it. This one is a new one in defense is with NATO, so it's always nice when you have large companies which say, how do I work with a startup that's 4 years old? You're not mature enough. I don't know anything about your technology. How do I make sure that vendor viability makes sense? And those are very legitimate questions when you're large groups and you need to assess your risk between working with a big consulting firm that will do like customized software or use your solution.
How do you become legit in front of them? How do you convince them?
Some are willing to take the bet, and those like the early adopters are the ones we're like most lucky to have in the startup journey. And then when you have NATO that says, this is a good technology, I want to use it, then oftentimes it's reassuring for other clients to say, well, if world peace isn't kind of, you dealing with such important topics, maybe it's powerful enough, maybe it's secure enough, because some people did the check that it was going through this. And some companies, they don't have the resources to do all those checks, and it's like, it takes time, it's resources. So when you have an external validation by a, let's say, powerful logo that you can put on your website, it speeds things up.
Actually, it's one of the questions I'm going to ask. I don't know if you put the BNP Paribas logo, but yeah, just to know, I think you mentioned it at the beginning, but how do you work with them, actually? I don't know which entity you work with at BNP.
So we work with BNP as various parts. We were initially, BNP was the first bank that backed us. So we started like this, and we got intros as well to various, where we say, all right, we're becoming a client and so on, but who can you introduce us to? Because BNP could be a client, and we had this really good account manager who was like, you should be talking to them and them and them, and you figure it out. So go talk to payment processing, they will tell you what they use. And they can say, well, it's good, but we have legacy systems. It would take too long to validate it, to get into the architecture. So for us with BNP, it's about finding the best use cases that are the easiest to implement. Because when you're such a large bank, well, you do have architecture and tech constraints and regulatory constraints as well. Like they are, I mean, BNP and it's legit as other banks. There are things they cannot do. There are things we can do with other industries, like real-time machine learning, simply not allowed in banking because you need to prove that the machine learning models that you do, you know how they work, you back them with the French authorities, fiscal.
So you would assist on like other use cases,
yeah,
other industries?
I mean, it's something good to know as a startup. You simply cannot do it for regulation reasons. And then we see more and more, we're talking with the people implementing like LLM and RAGs at scale, and this is a bit everywhere. And then BNP has specific people working on streaming topics. And so initially it was someone who was doing a PhD as a CIFRE mechanism. So it's mechanism between a research institute and a company.
Okay.
And they were working on streaming topics. So how to work with real-time data and tested pathway against other frameworks, validating it and so on. So we do have subject matter experts about our specific topic within BNP. And their title is like streaming, so that's the right person.
It's amazing because I feel like it's always about human. Even though BNP Paribas is a bank, everything that you mentioned is also connections. But I'm going to keep you for the last 2 minutes. I have like two very quick questions. The first question is very simple, Claire. What would be like the most underrated advice, like an advice that you would have liked to receive prior to creating a pathway? Not an easy one, though.
Not an easy one. I mean, I feel when you start, you get a lot of advice from very different people with very different perspectives. And the hardest part is filtering this advice. It's not so much not having the advice as having so many contradictory pieces of information.
You can get drowned.
Yeah, and some people say, no, you should really not go towards this industry. It will never move forward. You should never do a public tender. It will take forever, and then it's one of our largest clients. You should never do defense. It's too long, too complicated. And they make sense, but at the beginning, and for us, it didn't make sense.
So the best advice would be like to test and learn by yourself.
It would be, don't trust everything you're being told because you're young and you don't know. And like you have people who've had decades in the industry who want to share and want to help. And the best advice is try to filter this and kind of reflect on everything and pick what you want instead of trying to absorb everything and not knowing what to make of them.
Be critic, like have some critics. Last question, very easy. Vivatech 2024. I know it's not your first edition, but what about this edition? What would be like one word to describe this edition for you?
This edition is super nice. Last year we won the Female Founder Challenge, so we had an award given by the Prime Minister, Elisabeth Borne now, and Susanna is going back on stage with this new batch of fantastic female founders, kind of sharing some perspectives. So we have this, and then every year it's the opportunity to see our clients in person, see some people that we're interacting with, and making sure we have this conversation.
So like meeting / serendipity?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Claire.